So, hi there. Oh, we're recording. Excellent. Okay, well, hello. Hello, afternoon, and welcome to, I think, the first RSC TV of the year, perhaps. I don't know. It's great to see so many folk joining us for today, and I think, oh, Francis has just joined us. Hello, Francis. You got back from Aberdeen okay? You're just checking up to make sure what I'm saying is the right thing. Yeah, excellent. Okay. Okay, first thing, I suppose, what we'll do is we'll just briefly define exactly what we're talking about as far as cloud services are concerned. Cloud services are concerned. Oh gosh, now according to the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the States, they call cloud computing a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable computing, whatever that is. But in a sense, really, it's just online, scalable, flexible, and generally pay-as-you-go kind of resources. And I think that's pretty much understood by everyone these days. It's not that new now that nobody knows what it's about. Certainly, if you don't, everybody will have used it, or anybody that's actually using anything online or even computing in general will have used some kind of cloud services at some point, if not every day. So it's not something that is actually you can escape from, I think, these days, and it's certainly making quite an impact, generally speaking. So it's certainly worth a look at. The type of services that you get, I mean, there's definitions of the different sort of service models which you undoubtedly come across, but it might be worth just touching on what it actually means and what they actually are. You have this, what they call, software as a service, or SaaS, which undoubtedly, you'll have seen. But generally speaking, that's what users would consume that as a product. It's things like YouTube, for example, is software as a service, or another one would be Office 365. That would be software as a service. Google Apps, Dropbox, all these type of things, they're all basically software as a service. What it really means is that you're very limited in the amount of configuration you can do. You can't actually upload your own applications to it. The applications are delivered to you and you just consume it. Again, you depending on what the model actually is, some of it's free, some of it's free up to a certain point, and then you pay for the rest and that type of thing. So there's various different, depending on what the actual application is, there's various different models of payment, if payment is an issue in that. And then you have platform as a service. That gives you an awful lot more flexibility. That's things like Microsoft Azure, which is a platform. It's like you're given an operating system, and you can put your own applications on it. So Google App Engine, for example, Amazon Beanstalk, and what's the other one? Amazon Web Services. They're generally speaking considered to be platforms, because once you procure them, buy them, or lease them, or whatever the model might be, you can then put your own applications onto that. I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, some of the sort of things that come up with that. But it gives you a lot more flexibility in what you can do. It's one of the more popular ones is for institutions as well, because it means then that you might not actually have to procure a lot of hardware, but you can still deliver the same kind of services without actually investing in too much hardware, because the platform that's running can be sitting somewhere else, remote from your campus. We'll talk about that in a second. Infrastructure as a service, that's pretty much all bells and whistles. That's things like Amazon's Elastic Computing, or EC2 as we call it, or Google Cloud Storage, or Dell vCloud. That's where you would migrate your entire computing needs onto it. So you would have storage in there, you would have computing processing power, you'd have databases, you would have all kinds of different things and requirements in there. And again, that doesn't necessarily need to be on campus. That could be off campus. And there's a few institutions that have actually moved, pretty much close to that, where everything is migrated onto that. I don't know if any colleges have yet done that sort of thing, but there's certainly in higher education that's in one instance that I know of is actually they've gone for that, or it's perhaps as a slightly mixed thing, where they've got infrastructure on campus and most of it on, I think it's on IBM cloud services. They use that. So there's sort of different kind of models of cloud services that can be delivered to you. And well, I suppose what's the motivating factor? What's the reason for change? And well, some of these things we'll probably go into a little bit later on. But it can help you reduce your capital expenditure or your operational expenditure. So for example, if you've get to the point where you're having to renew a lot of your hardware, which happens every so often, your file servers, for example, or your storage arrays and things like this, you then realize that the upfront costs can be relatively high, because you're having to buy the live machine, and perhaps there's a load balancing machine aligned to go with that, and then there's a backup, and then there's perhaps a development machine. So you're looking at 3 or 4 physical machines for each one kind of application that you're actually running at that. So that's can knock a hole in any budget. Even if you do run some kind of virtualization, you're still having to have buy hardware to do that. And so you've got an upfront capital expenditure, and then you've got operational costs as well. So you've got your air conditioning, you've got electricity, you've got all kinds of consumables to pay for to keep that all running. And then if you could move that somewhere else so that so that it's basically off your books, then that certainly can be an attractive issue. A lot of institutions, of course, are having a lot of pressure put on them to reduce their carbon footprint. Yes, the jury's out on that a little bit, as far as like, well, really, are we actually reducing our carbon footprint if we start using a cloud service? Is it not just moving it to somebody else's kind of responsibility? But if you look at the way that, for example, Google is cooling a lot of their systems. They've got a big, it's actually not that far from the Microsoft site out in Ireland. The way that they cool their hardware is using just cool fresh water. Now I don't know of any institutions that are actually doing that. Certainly colleges. It's very difficult to cool a smallish server room with machines or air conditioning units that don't use nasty chemicals and use an awful lot of power. So some of these larger kind of silos can take advantage of this sheer scale, and they are absolutely enormous. To use less impacts as far as their air conditioning, and they can also take advantage of different ways of some of the power that they're using as well, and disaster recovery and things that can also be enhanced. So there is actually an awful lot of advantages to going down the route as far as cloud services are concerned. But of course, on the downside, there are a few issues that you really need to look at. So things like an exit strategy or a migration strategy, for example. Google has got a bit of a habit of just stopping a service just because it doesn't really fit their overall strategy, or maybe changing something, and then without an awful lot of warning, you could be kind of like going, well, actually we use that, so what are we going to do? So before you go into it, you really have to think about, well, what would I do if that was closed down, or what would I do if this changed? What's my sort of, what if I wanted to move to a different vendor? So you have to think about what exactly would you have in place in those kind of situations. And also, yeah, you do need to have a resilient and high-performance network. Okay, most of us are generally lucky enough that we've got a reasonably good connection to Janet, which certainly helps us. And of course, I'll mention a little bit about some of the things that Janet are actually doing to help us with cloud services. But you may not be, you might be in a out of the way rural place or whatever that might not have a fantastic connection, and it does mean that you will be much more dependent on those connections. But on the other hand, if you take your history of your uptime as far as connectivity is concerned and think, well, how often have I actually been out of commission because my connection to Janet has gone down? And then you put that, you may perhaps weigh that against, well, how often have I been interrupted with my services because of a virus infection, or because of on-site power, or for other issues that are nothing to do with network or cloud services. You probably find it's probably not really going to have that much of a major impact. But once you've got started using some of these cloud services, you really are, all in. There's not much room for error. And of course, licensing issues, that it can be a little bit complex. I've mentioned that the platform as a service can be awkward if you're putting, say, another vendor's software on there. So perhaps you've got an application that you use off some vendor, and you're normally running it on campus on a piece of hardware, in a conventional way, or even in the virtualized sense. And as soon as you put that into a cloud, you want to say, well, you have to check to make sure that that vendor will actually continue maintaining it, even though it's on perhaps some kind of cloud platform somewhere. Even though, for all intents and purposes, it's no real different, but a vendor may take umbrage at the fact that their application is sitting somewhere else, and you don't really have that much control about exactly where that is. It's just in this sort of ether. So that may be a bit of an issue, and some of them may not be used to that. So you really have to make sure that the applications that you've got will actually sit on a cloud service before you venture down that road. But this is probably the single most important slide of everything, is strategic alignment. You want to make sure that what you're implementing does actually have, it fits in with your institutional strategic document and your own aims and objectives of your institution. I just want to sort of kind of go over a wee bit about how that all fits in. I mean, normally what you would have is at the top level you would have strategic perspectives, and they would just describe briefly an area of strategy, and that would be things like students, or growth and development, processes, or finance, and they're just single words of actually defining, well, that's an area of a strategic perspective. At each one of those we'll have a list of strategic aims, and I've just mentioned a couple there. Perhaps in the student area perspective, you would have increase international student recruitment and retention, or enhance student experience, that type of thing. These are just general aims. You don't really have any more detail than that, but each strategic aim will have a number of strategic objectives to support that strategic aim. And that's where you start beginning to define a little bit more about how you're going to be supporting those strategic aims. And and therefore you would have things like, you know, implementing an online tool for collaborative team working. That might fit some particular, you know, or help to support a particular strategic aim. And then you might have something that, you know, reducing operational costs and carbon footprint or something. You know, that might have, you know, might support another particular strategic aim that might come under, I don't know, finance, or it might come under, you know, I don't know, processes or something. I don't know, something along those lines. But it is absolutely vital, you know, that you know, when you're looking at these strategic objectives, you're then moving into the more operational, and that's where you define things like, you know, the actual technical solution that supports that strategic objective. And so you have a really clear line going from a technical solution supporting a strategic objective, which then helps you to support a strategic aim. You know, so there's a clear line that goes between them. If you do it in that way, that each technical solution, or if it's a cloud service or something like that, that it fits very neatly into supporting a particular strategic objective, which is generally speaking, you know, defined by senior management, so that you can go to senior management and say, I can address that strategic objective and support that strategic objective with this solution. And that strategic objective, you know, then, you know, helps to the institution move towards solving a strategic aim. If you don't have strategic alignment for some kind of for these solutions, then really you're just aiming and you're going to head into difficulty and trouble. It could be that, you know, you're just adding expense where no expense is needed, or you might be doing something that's just inappropriate, or but you really have to, you know, communicate to senior management exactly how this technical solution is going to be supporting those particular, you know, strategic objectives. And that's one way of making sure that that the RSC can sort of help you with those kind of things. You know, I just put down there aims and objectives. What's the difference? That's one question I do tend to get asked actually in strategy. Is, you know, aims and objectives tend to get thrown in together, but actually they're quite distinct and different things. You know, a strategic aim is more woolly, and it takes in a larger definition of what your institution is actually wanting to do. An objective is something a little bit more specific and a little bit more, well, actually we're going to support that strategic aim with this objective, you know, and then you build tactics underneath that, and the tactics are basically technical solutions and operational plans, which but that's a whole other presentation, I think, you know, just on strategy alone. But this is probably the most important thing you got to get right, is strategy and strategic alignment. Legal issues, yeah, big kind of thing that needs to be talked about. But there is help out there. There's two things. There's like a starter for 10, I think, really. A nice, straightforward one is if you look at just legal. On their website, just do a search for cloud. There's this document, I don't know if you can see that. It's about, I don't know how many pages, something like 13, 14, 15 pages or something. And basically it's a report on cloud computing and the law. And it was published in 2011 there. It's actually a really good just overview about some of the key points, you know, considerations for legal risk really, and it's really just to help you get your head around some of the things that may sort of come up in discussions, so that when you do start to begin to take things forward, you're probably better informed about the language and about the sort of things that that may sort of come up, or will come up really as you start going down the road of some of the cloud services. I'm just sort of like looking off there. Some of the data security and compliance, jurisdiction, confidentiality, freedom of information, intellectual property, equality and accessibility. You know, there's all these kind of things that will come up in discussions as you go further on down, and it's probably a good idea to scan your eye across this sort of like introductory bit, just so that you can get your mind into the sort of thinking, because it's not going into in any great technical or sort of legalese detail, but it certainly is well researched, and it really does, hit some of the points of some of the things you eventually will have to think about and look at. So for a starter for 10, I think that's probably a good place to go. And Jason at Jisc Legal has got a really nice video of himself doing a wee presentation, a wee talk about cloud computing in the law. So it's really worth a visit. And then when you want to go and take things a little bit further, you really could do an awful lot worse than to contact Janet Cloud Services. Janet Cloud Services used to be the sort of like called, Francis will keep me right here, but I think it was the sort of cloud, Janet Brokerage, but Janet Brokerage is come under the whole sort of Janet Cloud Services, and one of the cloud services that they I've developed there is some of the sort of like investigating some of the legal aspects of cloud services and how it would affect your institution, and some of the not just the sort of issues, but some of the requirements that you might need to consider when you start thinking about adopting cloud services. So when you want to start to take things a little bit more seriously and a bit more, you want to see what kind of impact that may have, then I think your second protocol there really would be to contact cloud at ja.net. But I think I've got an address and talk about that later on. Just looking at my time. Oh, speaking of which, this is it. The Janet Cloud Services. I did actually read somewhere that it's like more than 30 FE and HE institutions have actually taken made use of the cloud services. I think it's probably more than that actually, because certainly maybe that's the Janet services, but certainly for cloud services, there's very few institutions that don't use some form of cloud services, because remember that things like YouTube, for example, is a cloud service. So there's probably very few institutions in the country that have not used cloud services of some kind or other. It just depends on how much of that you've taken up. And I've just listed some of the universities and colleges here there that have that use cloud services in a greater or lesser extent, and there's case studies out there that we can make available to you of what they've actually done. Well, Francis, myself, and probably one or two of others we were up in Aberdeen just yesterday, and the chaps up there were actually talking about how much how they've migrated towards Office 365, using that for mail, and how they migrated all their mailboxes over to it from Exchange. It's quite involved. It took them a year and a half, something to actually do that, but it was a vast job. For some of the other smaller colleges, it might not be such a problem, but if a large university like Aberdeen can do it, then a college certainly can. In fact, I was just talking to folks down in Borders College, and they've just done that as well. They've migrated to Office 365 just for their mail, but they've done some interesting thing with a thing called FIM. What's it called again? Forefront Identity Manager. It's a Microsoft product, so that they can actually take the Unity's student identity from the Unity system, and they gathered a lot of that from online registration, and it ports it straight over. Once the students matriculated, it ports that straight over to the Active Directory and creates a network account for them. And for on-campus, but not only that, it populates the Office 365 mailing system for them and all the other functionality that they have for cloud services, and that's done basically automatically with no human intervention. It's done a sort of like a batch job type of thing on overnight. So it's basically just got within 24 hours they're completely activated, and it really doesn't matter how many students have been registering that day, it's all done automatically for them, you know. Some of the other the things that Janet have been offering is help and support in looking at how, well, obviously 65 for Education and Google Apps for Education, you know, are two very, very popular ones, of course, of our cloud services, but Janet are helping institutions to take advantage of that. There's a framework around that helps institutions take the best advantage of those two popular cloud services. So it's really well worth a visit and having a look. Now, as you know, I mean, as talked about, obviously 65 and Google Apps, they're sort of like the software as a service kind of solution, but if you're looking at much more than that, things like the actual infrastructure as such, then you can actually have a look at some of the other cloud services around. There's a Dell vCloud, and there's Amazon EC2, which is elastic computing, which is a infrastructure service, although they're Amazon Web Services is more of a sort of like a platform service, but still, that all comes under, or you can get help in the sort of procurement stages of that if you go make contact with Janet. But one of the other I'm just having a look at, I think I've got a page of the Janet Cloud Services. Yeah, actually I do. Some of the other things they offer is a Cloud Services for Education Agreement, just talked about the shared data center space, Dropbox for Business. I'm just having a look. Oh yeah, the financial. Oh, I've got it written down here. The financial X-ray. This is actually quite interesting. One of the drivers for change, of course, to look at or to migrate to cloud services is perhaps a financial impact on what that may, what kind of savings it could do. But you only really know what kind of savings you are making if you know how much your IT infrastructure is actually costing you at the moment, and that might not be so obvious. There may be intangible costs that you don't realize. I mean, for example, it might be institution-wide costs like that are actually stumped up by the estates office, which is like, I don't know, the cost of running all your air conditioning, for example, like and the power, your electricity bill. Most computing departments probably don't actually pay for their own electricity. That's paid for out of just the general institution. Other costs as well, maybe unaccounted for, that you haven't really got your finger on. And what the Janet Financial X-ray just basically helps you identify all the costs and find out what your actual institutional impact is, if your institutional costs are for running a computing center and for running your IT services. And once you actually have a good handle on exactly how much your institution's paying for you and your institute, your IT, you can then start saying, well, if we started moving particular services to cloud services, how much would we actually save in that? Because you still probably have to pay for something. Certainly, the cloud services are not necessarily free, so you will have to pay something, but you will, undoubtedly make some kind of a capital expenditure saving for sure. But you want to make sure that your operational costs are accounted for as well. So you can actually use this financial X-ray consultancy that Janet are offering to help you identify what some of these actual costs are. I'm going to have to hurry up here. You're probably all well familiar for Google Apps for education, but some of the things that you might not know is that Google offer a huge array of APIs, so you can then start integrating some of the applications that you actually have on campus to integrate with Google Apps. And so that may be something that might be of interest to you. But I'm sure you're probably all aware of Google Apps, and there's quite a few institutions have actually moved towards using Google Apps for Education. But certainly, you've got the URL there if you want to have a look, and I'm sure you're probably more familiar with Google Apps, so I probably won't spend too much time talking about this other than drawing your attention to the fact of the APIs for linking into some of your institutional systems is probably something that's quite attractive to you. But Microsoft Office 365 is probably a bit more popular now because of its the way that it can interlink with desktop Office Suite. A couple of interesting things I'll probably touch on. Well, one of the things that was a bit of a problem was SkyDrive storage, personal storage. Didn't really come under the Office 365 umbrella, but now it does. SkyDrive Pro is the personal storage space of Microsoft Office 365. So not only do you have a shareable storage thing with SharePoint, but you do have your own personal storage, which you can also share particular individual files, much like Dropbox and that type of thing. But it's tied in with the exact same ID as your Office 365. So if your account credentials, it's the same, and it will give you certainly at the lower level 25 gigabit of personal storage, which is way above what most colleges could possibly offer on campus. So that scalability really does offer a lot. I've got a contact there. That's the Alan Wood from Microsoft. He's the educational contact. You can also contact Mark McManus, but Alan Wood is the Microsoft educational contact for us. So you might want to take a note of his name, drop him a line or something if you wanted to. Actually, if I want to go back, yeah, actually I've got, there's Google. Gronya Phelan, I can't pronounce that, at google.com, based in Ireland. I met her once at a conference, and she's the educational rep for Google. That's her contact details there. So you can actually contact her directly. But the name escapes me. There's a new start that's actually taking over the UK-wide educational market but if you contact Gronya, she can put you in touch with them or deal with your questions as far as Google is concerned. We're hoping to get somebody, if not Gronya herself, then somebody else from Google and somebody from Microsoft to actually be talking about their cloud services offering at the annual RSC conference later on this year. So see how that goes. BT is a bit of a surprise, actually. I've been talking to BT about some of the things that they do. I hadn't realized that BT are actually offering Office 365 support and services. They're actually in partnership with Microsoft Office. One of the things that was a bit of an issue with Link, which is the telephony and video conferencing kind of thing, like Skype under a different name, but not really Skype, it's something else, but it ties in with that kind of service. But it was difficult to, unless you actually had a Link server on campus linked into your telephone system or your service provider telephony system, you couldn't really dial out from that Link service. And also it was a bit difficult for some of the international calls. There was a bit of an issue with that and actually managing how that was done. So it was okay for just office to office but calling, but you couldn't, it wasn't easy. Most institutions kind of like resisted the possibility of using Link as the alternative to a telephone system. But if you use BT hosted services, they will actually host a Link server for you, so you don't actually have to have anything on campus at all, and that would allow you to actually do all your communication office to office, but actually allow your staff or whoever has the right credentials, to be able to dial out from the campus to wherever they want to do using the normal telephone connections, but using the desktop app, you know, or the cloud app, as it were, of Link. And there's a whole load of different features along with that, which are actually pretty cool. But it means then that it simplifies that whole issue of managing a telephone system and having two separate telephone systems. This really does converge your telephone and IT infrastructure together as a solution, and combines it with all the functionality of, you know, your calendaring, your email, and your connectivity as far as Link, and it's all very nicely sort of like synchronized together. And one of the ways of actually making that even simpler for yourself is to actually use the BT hosted service for actually doing that. They've got a contact name there of Ian Galt at bt.com. You might want, you know, if you want any more information about how that actually works and how that would actually help you, help your institution, then you can give him a quick call. And I think we're nearly there. Yeah, we are. Okay. Well, that's basically, you know, half an hour's worth of a bit more of cloud services, and just a starter, I suppose. It goes an awful lot more than that. But if you need any help or anything like that, we're here. You can email the group here, support@rsc.ac.uk, or if you want to contact Janet, you can contact them at cloud@ja.net, and you know, I basically asked them anything on to do with some of the cloud services, and I'm sure they'll help you out. If you would like to have a chat with myself or whatever, then just give me a shout, and certainly can get your you know, moving in the right direction, or a direction anyway. And you're free to ask any questions. I think I've got microphones there, so if you wish to actually ask questions with your microphone or type them in onto the chat, you're more than welcome to. Either way, and I'll see if I can answer any of the questions. If not, thank you very much for listening, and you can certainly send me an email or something at a later date if something comes to mind, and if not, then thank you very much for joining us for this wee chat about it. Oh, I've got Francis there. I think if am I doing the right thing if I click here? Oh gosh. Oh no, that was wrong. Stephen, right. Dumfries and Galloway College use Moodle. Our version called LearnNet. Can cloud services integrate into a system like Moodle, for example, permitting students to submit documents from Google Apps or Microsoft, obviously? Off the top of my head, I believe so. That certainly, if you're using Google Apps, it would take a bit of coding, but you could use the API to help you on that, linking into Google Apps. With Microsoft Office, I'm not entirely sure. I can't answer that, but what I could do is I can find out for you on that. It's not something I've done myself, but I think I know someone that may have, so I could actually forward that and find out for you and get back to you on that. I'll just take a wee note of that, but it's quite a useful thing to think about, actually. Anybody else? Oh, as Tom McMaster's just mentioned there, Steve, we've linked Moodle to Office 365. Not sure how linked though. Well, maybe you two guys might want to compare notes, and you could probably resolve some issues together then. And you know, I'd be interested in actually hearing how that actually kind of works. which actually brings me on to another thing about case studies. So if any of you guys have actually done something interesting there, like Tom there, you've actually linked Moodle to Office 365, perhaps you might want to chat with me about that, and I'll do a case study write-up about it, and who knows, maybe you might win a badge or something. Because that sounds quite interesting. That I'll get back to you on that and see if we can take that forward. Yes, yeah. I think you're probably right, Stephen. They're talking about, you know, whether it's worth it. Certainly on the face of it, I'm thinking it might well be. Oh, there's Penny's just come up with a link there. Okay, well, if no one can think about. Oh, Francis, are you trying to? Francis, you've got a wee microphone thing come up there. Have I to do something to enable that? I don't know. You've got a wee microphone symbol coming up, but I'm not sure how I can enable that.
Marcus, I think Francis's audio is a bit delayed, so I think that's the issue we're having here. Yep.
Well, Francis, if you maybe you want to just type something in then rather than using the microphone. I don't know what I've done. Maybe I've done something wrong here too. But maybe, Francis, if you want to make some comments on the chat bit instead, you can we'll send that out. Okay. Okay, excellent. No problem. If anything does pop into your mind or whatever, don't hesitate just to give us a call or just drop us an email or something like that, and yeah, I'll do the same. Okay, well, I'm going off to get something to eat now, I think, and I'm sure you've probably heard enough from me. So it really just leaves for me to say thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully over the course of time we'll bump into each other and see each other, and we'll catch up. Again, thanks very much, and see you all guys at another time. Bye-bye.